Even though professional wrestling is built around sweat, blood, and physical punishment, some wrestlers developed reputations that went far beyond the normal wear and tear of the job.
I didn't shave anything, right? The only time I ever shaved the arm was...
In fact, certain names became infamous among their peers. We're talking about wrestlers who were rumored to smell terrible.
When Vader walked past you, he smelled like vomit.
Stars whose hygiene habits became infamous locker room stories. Big Van Vader. No discussion about wrestlers with terrible hygiene would be complete without beginning with Big Van Vader. In fact, his reputation was so notorious that it reportedly became a point of contention with WWE management and several top stars. During the peak of his career, Vader was widely regarded as one of the most intimidating and physically dominant big men in professional wrestling. His matches were intense and physical. However, several wrestlers over the years claimed that sharing the ring with Vader could be an especially unpleasant experience. During his time in WWE, Vader reportedly refused to wash his wrestling gear, particularly his signature red and black singlets and leather mask. According to various accounts, this stemmed from a superstition he developed while wrestling in Japan, where he believed that washing his gear would wash away his luck. This habit reportedly led to tension with many of his peers. Bret Hart once compared wrestling Vader to wrestling a cement truck filled with barf. Meanwhile, JBL also shared a story on the Something to Wrestle podcast about a match where Vader's gloves smelled so foul that the odor transferred into JBL's beard, forcing him to shave it just to get rid of the stench. Because of his massive 450-pound frame and famously stiff wrestling style, Vader also sweated heavily during matches, which only made the situation worse for his opponents.
Harley had a hand in there too to trip.
According to several backstage stories, stars such as Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart reportedly raised complaints to Vince McMahon about Vader's hygiene. Some wrestling historians have even suggested that these issues, combined with his hard-hitting in-ring style, may have contributed to his underwhelming WWE run compared to his legendary success in WCW and Japan. Mick Foley. Though Mick Foley is one of the most respected figures in wrestling history, a man whose career was built on punishment and an almost unbelievable tolerance for pain, he has also openly admitted that hygiene was sometimes the last thing on his mind. During the peak of his career, Foley wrestled under multiple gimmicks, including Mankind, Cactus Jack, and Dude Love, often performing in extremely brutal matches. One of the biggest contributors to the problem was his iconic Mankind mask. The original leather mask became notoriously foul-smelling over time because Foley wore it for years without properly cleaning it. The sweat-soaked leather reportedly darkened significantly from constant use, and Foley once admitted that he had to rub vapor rub under his mustache just to tolerate the smell while breathing during matches. Foley's famously frugal travel habits also added to the stories surrounding his hygiene. Triple H and other peers have recalled how Foley often tried to save money while on the road. At times, he would sleep on couches covered with newspapers rather than staying in hotels. Then there was the infamous Mr. Socko puppet. Before being used for the mandible claw, the sock was often kept tucked inside Foley's sweat-soaked tights for most of the match, making the move even more unpleasant for his opponents. Even Foley's Cactus Jack persona contributed to the image. With long, greasy hair and a deliberately disheveled appearance, the character looked chaotic and unkempt, something many of his peers claimed wasn't entirely an act. Sensational Sherry and Sapphire. Another bizarre hygiene story from WWE's past didn't involve a wrestler at all, but rather two managers, Sensational Sherry and Sapphire. During the late 1980s and early 1990s, both women were involved in the on-screen rivalry between Randy Savage and Dusty Rhodes. While their characters were enemies on television, Sherry and Sapphire were actually close friends and travel partners behind the scenes. However, according to stories later shared by Bruce Pritchard, that friendship was tested because of Sapphire's hygiene habits. Pritchard claimed that Sapphire regularly wore the same ring gear night after night without washing it, and she also had a reputation for avoiding showers at the arenas. Eventually, the situation became too much for Sherry to tolerate. After repeatedly asking Sapphire to clean her gear and shower, Sherry reportedly decided to handle the situation herself. According to Pritchard, she literally grabbed Sapphire and dragged her toward the locker room showers. Witnesses, including Miss Elizabeth, were reportedly stunned by the confrontation. Elizabeth even attempted to calm things down before the situation escalated further. The incident eventually required intervention from WWE agent Jack Lanza, who stepped in to settle the situation. Surprisingly, the dramatic approach seemed to work. After the confrontation, Sapphire reportedly began showering regularly and washing her gear before matches. Despite the chaotic locker room moment, Sherry and Sapphire remained friends afterward. But the story has since become one of the most unusual examples of how seriously some wrestlers took hygiene inside the locker room. Rikishi. Another wrestler whose hygiene became part of his on-screen persona was Rikishi. Unlike many of the other names on this list, Rikishi's reputation was largely tied to a deliberately disgusting move that became one of the most infamous spots of the Attitude Era. Known as the Stink Face, the move involved Rikishi backing into the corner and forcing his opponent's face directly into his backside. Given Rikishi's massive 400-pound frame, the move was designed specifically to humiliate opponents and disgust the crowd. While fans often found the moment hilarious, many wrestlers who had to take the move admitted it was far from pleasant. Several WWE stars later joked in interviews that taking the stink face was exactly as uncomfortable as it looked, especially during long matches under hot arena lights where sweat was unavoidable.
I can't believe this! No! How humiliating!
In fact, one of the most infamous stories about the move involves Kurt Angle. During a televised match, Angle later joked that Rikishi had taken a bathroom break shortly before performing the move and apparently didn't clean up properly afterward. According to Angle, the resulting stink face was so foul that it left him feeling hot and steamy, and he later claimed it even resulted in a case of pink eye. Stories like this only added to the legendary reputation of the stink face, turning it into one of the most unforgettable and notoriously unpleasant moves in WWE history. Andre the Giant. Unlike Big Van Vader or Mick Foley, whose hygiene issues were often attributed to superstition or neglect, Andre the Giant faced challenges that largely stemmed from the simple fact that the world was never designed for someone of his extraordinary size. At his peak, Andre stood well over 7 feet tall and weighed more than 500 pounds, meaning even basic tasks like traveling or using standard facilities could become serious obstacles. One of the most famous stories illustrating this came during a long international flight from Tokyo. According to Brutus Beefcake, Andre was simply too large to fit inside the airplane's small lavatory. With no other options available during the long flight, the crew reportedly set up a makeshift solution behind a curtain at the back of the plane using buckets and garbage bags. The situation quickly became unpleasant for passengers nearby, with the smell reportedly causing discomfort throughout the cabin. There were also stories about Andre's personal habits outside the ring. Hulk Hogan once claimed that Andre rarely brushed his teeth, something that reportedly became such a concern that Vince McMahon arranged a special dental appointment for him. However, according to those present, the visit did not go particularly well. Inside the ring, Andre's enormous appetite and lifestyle occasionally created awkward moments as well.
Lord Alfred Hayes, where did you... Unbelievable!
One infamous story from Mexico claims that after consuming a heavy meal along with tequila and clamato juice, Andre suffered an unfortunate accident during a match with Bad News Brown, sending his opponent rushing to the showers immediately afterward. Fellow wrestlers also frequently joked about Andre's legendary flatulence, something many attributed to his massive diet and alcohol consumption. Jake Roberts once recalled a moment during a match where Andre sat on him and released gas for an uncomfortably long time, leaving behind a stain on Robert's gear. Much of this ultimately traced back to the biological realities of Andre's condition, acromegaly. The disorder not only caused his enormous size, but also affected his metabolism and organ function. Andre was known for consuming enormous amounts of food and alcohol, sometimes drinking multiple bottles of wine or an entire case of beer without appearing heavily intoxicated. Because of these factors, many of the unusual hygiene stories surrounding Andre weren't simply the result of poor habits, but rather the unavoidable complications of living life in a body unlike almost anyone else's. Abdullah the Butcher. Unlike Big Van Vader or Andre the Giant, whose hygiene stories often centered on smells or the logistical problems caused by their size, Abdullah the Butcher became infamous for something far more dangerous: serious concerns about blood safety inside the ring. Known for his violent, hardcore style and willingness to bleed in nearly every match, Abdullah built a reputation as one of the most brutal and unpredictable performers in wrestling history. However, that same style also led to controversy. Abdullah was well known for blading, and several wrestlers later claimed he sometimes did this to opponents without their knowledge or consent. The issue became far more serious years later. In 2014, Canadian wrestler Devin Nicholson, also known as Hannibal, won a $2.3 million judgment against Abdullah in court. Nicholson argued that he contracted hepatitis C during a 2007 match in which Abdullah allegedly used the same razor blade on both of them. Medical testing presented during the case reportedly showed that the two men shared a rare matching strain of the virus.
Known for his forearm shots. He looks absolutely insane right now, this Hannibal.
Stories about Abdullah's in-ring habits had circulated long before the lawsuit. Throughout his decades-long career, he became notorious for using unsanitary foreign objects during matches. One of his most infamous weapons was a dinner fork he kept hidden in his trunks, which he would use to stab opponents in the forehead during brawls. Abdullah's own forehead became a visual symbol of that violent style. Years of excessive blading left it covered in deep crater-like scars, so pronounced that wrestling lore even claimed coins or gambling chips could sit inside the indentations. Dick Murdoch. Another name often mentioned in stories about questionable road habits is Dick Murdoch. Known for his rough-and-tumble Captain Redneck persona, Murdoch's lifestyle on the road was just as unrefined as his character in the ring. During wrestling's territorial era, it was common for wrestlers to share hotel rooms while traveling from city to city, and Murdoch's habits quickly became the subject of locker room stories. One of the most memorable accounts came from Dusty Rhodes, Murdoch's longtime friend and tag team partner.
Gentlemen, these two veterans know how to get it done.
Rhodes once recalled waking up in a hotel room they were sharing and being overwhelmed by a terrible smell. Looking around the room, Rhodes noticed Murdoch had left behind a pair of yellow-stained underwear, which he blamed for the odor that filled the room. According to Rhodes, that moment was enough to convince him that sharing hotel rooms on the road might not be the best idea anymore. From that point forward, he reportedly preferred traveling as a singles competitor rather than continuing to share rooms during long road trips. Sid Eudy. Another wrestler whose name has surfaced in several locker room stories is Sid Eudy, better known to fans as Sid Vicious or Psycho Sid. Despite being widely praised for his towering physique and intimidating presence, Sid was occasionally mentioned in shoot interviews by fellow wrestlers for having questionable hygiene habits during his peak years in the 1990s. According to some accounts, the demanding travel schedule and long matches often left him drenched in sweat, and he wasn't always quick to clean up afterward. But the most infamous story involving Sid didn't come from a locker room rumor. It allegedly happened during one of the biggest matches of his career.
No one will quit. I can't see anybody giving up. They're too tough.
On March 23, 1997, at WrestleMania 13, Sid entered the main event as the reigning WWE champion. Inside the Rosemont Horizon, he was set to defend the title against The Undertaker, who was chasing his 6th consecutive WrestleMania victory. Earlier in the night, Bret Hart versus Stone Cold Steve Austin, so the crowd was already emotionally drained by the time the main event began. This is when an extremely embarrassing incident allegedly occurred, as Sid reportedly lost control of his bowels in the middle of the move. Despite the situation, The Undertaker reportedly finished the maneuver, extending his WrestleMania undefeated streak to 6-0. Luke Gallows. Another modern wrestler who has often been the subject of locker room jokes about hygiene is Luke Gallows. Throughout his career, Gallows has frequently been teased by fellow wrestlers for his road habits. One of the people who has joked about it the most is his longtime tag team partner, AJ Styles, who has playfully referred to Gallows as Big Stinky in various interviews and wrestling podcasts. The nickname became something of a running joke among their peers, especially during their time traveling together in groups like the OC. Several of these stories were shared during appearances on shows like Table for Three, where wrestlers often recalled the realities of life on the road. So far, we've talked about wrestlers whose reputations were tied to deliberately poor hygiene or gross gimmicks. But not every story in wrestling falls into that category. CM Punk. Sometimes, the extreme physical toll of the industry leads to embarrassing and completely unavoidable moments. And one of the most well-known examples of this involves CM Punk, and it happened during one of the most frustrating periods of his career. By late 2013, Punk was physically and mentally exhausted. Years of non-stop wrestling had taken a serious toll on his body. According to Punk, he was dealing with a concussion, multiple illnesses, and a growing infection on his back. Instead of being given time off, he claimed WWE doctors repeatedly prescribed antibiotics, specifically Z-Packs, to keep him performing. As Punk later put it, they essentially Z-Packed me to death. The constant medication came with unpleasant side effects. Punk said the antibiotics caused severe digestive issues that lasted for weeks, including persistent diarrhea. Unfortunately, the situation reached its most embarrassing moment on December 6, 2013, during an episode of WWE SmackDown. During a match with Dean Ambrose, Punk's body finally gave out.
Across the ring, Punk. Oh, and a desperation.
On Colt Cabana's Art of Wrestling podcast, Punk later admitted bluntly what happened. He said that mid-match, the antibiotics caused him to lose control, and he ended up soiling his gear in the ring. Remarkably, the live audience and television viewers had no idea anything had happened. Punk finished the match and continued performing despite the situation. After the show, however, Punk addressed it in his typical unfiltered style on social media. He tweeted that he had just shti my britches on SmackDown, and even asked fans to retweet it. WWE reportedly asked him to delete the message due to the language, which he did, only to follow it up with another sarcastic tweet saying, "This poop just ain't fun anymore." As crude as the story sounds, it became symbolic of the larger frustrations Punk had with the company at the time. On the same podcast, he also revealed that WWE medical staff had repeatedly dismissed a painful lump on his back as a harmless fatty deposit. When Punk eventually saw an outside doctor, he said it turned out to be a serious MRSA infection that had grown to the size of a baseball. Less than 2 months later, in January 2014, Punk famously walked out of WWE entirely. He wouldn't wrestle again for nearly 7 years. Ironically, after one of the most controversial exits in wrestling history, Punk eventually returned to the company, proving that in professional wrestling, even the messiest stories sometimes come full circle. John Cena. Another example of an unfortunate in-ring incident involves John Cena, whose legendary toughness sometimes came at the expense of his own digestive system. Cena once recalled a particularly rough night during a WWE tour stop in Winnipeg. In a 2008 interview with WWE Magazine, he explained that he had suffered severe food poisoning shortly before a match against Scott Steiner. Despite feeling extremely ill, Cena still went out to perform. The situation quickly spiraled once the match began. After taking a DDT, Cena realized he could barely keep himself together. Desperate, he stumbled toward the ringside area and asked the timekeeper where he could throw up. The solution was simple: crawl under the ring. Cena slid underneath and began vomiting. Unfortunately, things didn't stop there. As he later admitted with complete honesty, while he was throwing up, he also ended up soiling his gear at the same time. Thankfully for Cena, the match was essentially finished by that point, but the moment became one of the most embarrassing stories he has ever shared about his career. And oddly enough, that wasn't the only time something like this happened. Years later, during a conversation on the reality series Total Divas with Nikki Bella, Cena casually revealed another similar incident that occurred during a show in Saskatoon. Once again dealing with food poisoning, Cena said he ended up soiling himself during the ordeal and had no choice but to throw his gear away afterward. Ironically, Cena also battled food poisoning during one of the biggest matches of his career, his main event against The Rock at WrestleMania 29. That time, however, he managed to make it through the match without any additional disasters. As embarrassing as these stories are, they also highlight something many wrestlers pride themselves on: the determination to perform no matter what. Even while dealing with illness that would have sidelined most people, Cena still stepped into the ring and finished the job. An extreme example of the never-give-up mentality that defined his career. Yokozuna. Another infamous story from wrestling's touring days involves Yokozuna, and it reportedly happened during a WWE tour overseas in the mid-1990s. According to Bret Hart, One particularly chaotic match took place during a show in India, where Yokozuna was reportedly dealing with a severe case of food poisoning. International tours in that era were often rough on wrestlers. Long travel schedules, unfamiliar food, and constant performances sometimes meant competitors had to wrestle even when they weren't feeling their best. Unfortunately, that situation reportedly became very obvious during the match. At one point, Bret Hart was lying on the mat, selling an attack while Yokozuna prepared to deliver his famous Banzai drop, the move where the massive sumo-inspired star climbed the ropes and dropped his full weight onto his opponent. But as Bret later described in interviews, something didn't look quite right as Yokozuna climbed up. Hart claimed he noticed a large stain spreading across Yokozuna's trunks, something he later compared to what looked like a bowl of pea soup. Realizing he might be seconds away from being directly underneath the situation, despite the chaos, the match continued, as wrestlers in that era were expected to push through almost anything. Over the years, Bret Hart has retold the story with a mixture of disbelief and dark humor, turning it into one of the many bizarre road stories that have become part of wrestling folklore. Next up is Triple H. Throughout his career, the game built a reputation for brutal brawls and intense rivalries, but in 2013, one particular moment during a confrontation became memorable for a very different reason. During an episode of Raw in February 2013, Triple H made a surprise return to confront Brock Lesnar. The segment followed a classic WWE setup. Lesnar was in the ring when Triple H's music suddenly hit, sending the crowd into a frenzy. He marched down the ramp and immediately started brawling with The Beast, leading to a chaotic fight that spilled around the ringside area. The altercation was so intense that Lesnar reportedly needed 18 stitches after suffering a cut during the segment.
This is a frightening scene out here at ringside, ladies and gentlemen.
But while Lesnar walked away with a legitimate injury, fans watching the broadcast noticed something unusual about Triple H as well. During the brawl, a dark patch became visible on the front of his jeans, which quickly sparked speculation online. Screenshots circulated across wrestling forums and social media, with many fans joking that Triple H might have accidentally relieved himself during the confrontation. The moment quickly turned into one of those strange pieces of wrestling trivia that the internet never forgets. Triple H later addressed the situation with a sense of humor, joking that it's probably not the best idea to pick a fight with someone the size of Brock Lesnar while having a full bladder. And those were some of the strangest and downright gross moments in wrestling history. From shocking in-ring accidents to legendary locker room stories, these incidents prove that even the biggest superstars aren't immune to the unexpected. That being said, what do you think about today's video? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section, and before you leave, don't forget to like this video so you don't miss the next ones.